Welcome to The Explainer. So today we are dismantling a pretty massive myth. Pop culture has completely trained us to picture high IQ as this very specific stereotype, right? The loud, hyper-confident genius scribbling equations on a glass wall just to show off. But the actual psychology? Well, it tells a fundamentally different and honestly a much quieter story.
When you contrast that arrogant, know-it-all stereotype with the actual researched reality, it is literally night and day. Decades of cognitive psychology have proven that extreme intelligence doesn't just make someone a faster processor, it fundamentally alters how they experience the entire world. And as we're going to see today, those differences usually look like the exact opposite of what we assume brilliance looks like.
Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll briefly hit the neuroscience of the mind, unpack the social interaction paradox, explore the complex internal landscape, and finally, look at what it actually means to live at high resolution.
Let's start right off with Section 1, Neuroscience of the Mind, the engine that never stops.
Okay, let's dive into this because it is absolutely foundational. The psychologist Kazimir Dabrowski studied gifted individuals and he identified this thing he called psychomotor overexcitability. Just think of it as this restless internal energy, but instead of physical fidgeting, it expresses itself entirely in the mind. People with very high IQs frequently report that their thinking simply never stops. Not when they're resting, not late at night. There is literally always a background process running. Whether they're tackling a massive problem at work or just trying to pick a place for dinner, the brain isn't malfunctioning, it's just doing exactly what it was built to do.
And this isn't just theory, it's backed up by hard neuroscience. Rex Young, over at the University of New Mexico, found that a high IQ doesn't just mean your brain processes things faster in some isolated area. It actually means you have this massive simultaneous connectivity across entirely different regions of the brain. You're constantly building networks. And neuroscientific research also links this ability to higher baseline dopamine activity in the brain's reward system, meaning the highly intelligent brain demands constant novelty. If the intellectual challenge drops, their dopamine drops, and that leads to a really deep physiological restlessness. Which brings us to Section 2, the social interaction paradox, and why solitude is actually fuel.
Now, what's really interesting here is that the data is entirely counterintuitive. In a massive study published by the London School of Economics, researchers found that while average IQ individuals get a nice life satisfaction boost from frequent socializing, highly intelligent people reported the exact opposite. And why is that? Because for them, social interaction is incredibly cognitively expensive. For a brain that is automatically analyzing every single layer of a room, it genuinely needs stillness to recharge the prefrontal cortex. So solitude isn't some antisocial behavior, it's a mandatory biological fuel.
But, when they are in social situations, they face a really unique challenge. Psychologist Lita Hollingworth spent decades studying gifted adults, and she coined this brilliant phrase, the problem of stimulus poverty. It perfectly illustrates why a high IQ person might seem aloof or distant. It's really not arrogance, it's just a quiet longing for real depth. If they can't find someone to follow a complex idea all the way down the rabbit hole without turning back, they just calibrate themselves down. They hold back because their everyday environment just lacks the stimulus they so deeply require.
So what happens in a typical group setting? Well, they usually default to watching. From the outside, a quiet person might look socially incompetent or like they just have nothing to add. But research on social intelligence actually shows that higher IQ correlates with much greater accuracy in reading complex social cues. They are mapping the room. They're observing patterns and gathering massive amounts of social data. They aren't slower to speak. They just need a little more time to process the sheer volume of information they're absorbing before they even respond.
Let's move to Section 3, the complex internal landscape, where we look at emotions, doubt, and paralysis.
High intelligence actually looks incredibly vulnerable from the inside. It manifests in intellectual humility, being totally comfortable genuinely saying, hey, I don't know. It shows up as cognitive flexibility, where they treat their own beliefs as working theories and will happily change their minds when new evidence drops. It's just an honest cognitive update process. And finally, emotional overexcitability. Studies in the journal Intelligence confirm that a higher measured IQ correlates with significantly greater emotional reactivity to art, to moral questions, and to the suffering of others. They feel things so much deeper than they show.
But all this deep internal processing creates a strange paradox. Psychologist Carol Dweck identified a pattern known as complexity awareness. Basically, a highly intelligent person perceives the entire scope of a meaningful project before they even start. And because they can clearly see every single flaw and every gap between their internal vision and the final output, they freeze up. The procrastination you're seeing isn't laziness, it's actually the presence of way too much care. They procrastinate the hardest on the work that matters most to them.
And that brings us to the #1 trait observed by psychologist Albert Ellis in highly intelligent people. What is it? It's persistent self-doubt. Because they sit at the high end of the Dunning-Kruger effect, the deeper their understanding goes, the more clearly they see exactly how much remains uncertain. They treat any gap between their performance and their potential as a fundamental inadequacy. So ironically, doubt isn't a sign of lesser intelligence. For sure, it's often the most reliable signature of a greater one.
And finally, Section 4, living at high resolution and the cost of a connected mind. The legendary psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi found that the most intellectually capable individuals carry this quiet, persistent sense of just not quite belonging. They feel slightly out of sync with their immediate environment. But here's the thing, this isn't a personality disorder. As Csikszentmihalyi pointed out, it's simply the predictable result of experiencing the world at a totally different level of resolution. When you live at that high resolution, it changes what you notice, what you need, and honestly what ordinary life is capable of giving you.
This is exactly why society consistently misreads these brilliant minds. I mean, think about everything we've uncovered today. The person who biologically needs solitude to recharge their prefrontal cortex, we immediately call them antisocial.
The person whose brain has immense connectivity and just never stops running those complex background simulations, they just look incredibly anxious to the rest of the room. And the person who grasps the immense complexity of a topic and honestly admits what they don't know, well, they look uncertain, while the least informed person in the room is over there speaking with absolute authority.
So, the crucial point is this. High intelligence is not just about raw computing speed or getting a high score on a test. It is fundamentally about experiencing the full, overwhelming complexity of the world with almost no filter between you and it. It's a mind built to process more, connect more, and just go further than the everyday environments it moves through.
Which leaves us with a pretty important question to reflect on. Are you misreading a quiet struggle, whether that's in yourself or in someone you know, as a flaw, when it might actually be the very signature of a mind built for a higher resolution? Intelligence rarely announces itself loudly. Often, it's just quiet.